we can hear everyone that is speaking. Good afternoon to everyone that is joining us. I hope that all of you are as well as you can be, given the crisis that is happening now in our country, and with the global health crisis that we are still in. I am in a very interesting space, so I just ask for grace today, everyone, as we all should be lending to everyone at this time. And before we move forward, I just want to frame all of our discussion today with a portion of our equity policy. And it says that the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners acknowledges the historical, generational, and compounding reality of the system, structures, and practices that have intentionally created and continue to afford advantages to some groups while perpetuating racial inequities for others. Baltimore City Public Schools must take action for removing and actively repairing these inequities to ensure positive educational outcomes for our children. Goes on to say the city schools must move to disrupt and dismantle inequities in every area of our work. City schools will work to aggressively and efficiently eliminate inequitable practices, systems, and structures that create advantages for some students and families while disadvantaging others. City schools will allocate resources to replace those inequitable practices, systems, and structures with new ones to ensure that we provide racially equitable education and environments to our children and families of color. If those of you that are watching, and I know all of our staff and everyone here, our CEO, Dr. Santalise, has penned quite a moving statement yesterday that was disseminated to all of our stakeholders. I just encourage all of us to read that as we move forward in the work for our young people. I've been on calls with my students today, and they're also in an interesting space, as the majority of them are Black and brown children. So as we move forward in the meeting today and in our work, just keeping that at the forefront of our mind, that we're in this work for our young people, for our children, and for our communities. And it is important that we dismantle any type of inequity that might present itself as a barrier for them in our communities. With that, I want to move, I guess, now into the instructional framework rubric update. I'm going to ask if it is possible, since we have several things on our agenda, to committee members, if we could hold our comments and questions to the end of the presentation.
Excuse me a second, Commissioner, Chair.
Yes,
I just want to make one quick statement, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am.
In reference to the letter that Dr. Santalise sent out to the community, the teachers, administrators, the staff, everybody. I was extremely taken to emotional.
Dr. Bondima, we lost you, but you're back. Go ahead.
Okay. I thought it was appropriate, and I thought it was well written and well said, and I was so pleased that she has sent such a wonderful document, and I think that it was right on time. So I just want her to know that and I'm hoping that other members of the board will thank her for that. Thank you.
Is there anything else before we move forward?
No, not for me. No, that's it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever is leading this. Who's presenting for us today? Is it Jessica?
Yes.
Okay, great, Jessica. You have the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to commissioners, members of the board. We're here to provide an update on our work around the instructional framework rubric. This summer, as we were talking around a board policy focused on employee evaluations more broadly and formal observations and the experience for our educators school leaders related to formal observations was really at the forefront of a lot of discussion. We were at the same time in the midst of going on 2 years of work related to updates to our instructional framework rubric, which is the rubric and the language used in formal observations for classroom teachers. So in a very understandable, natural way, a lot of the discussion started to lend itself toward questions around the rubric itself and folks being interested in where we were with those updates and listening to what educators and school leaders were sharing about that. So we're excited today to provide feedback and an update to the board around our progress and the updates that we have made to the instructional framework rubric. One thing I would just offer is you look at slide 2, knowing that this is such a pivotal document and resource for our district and an opportunity for us to really name expectations for what strong pedagogy looks like for our educators and for people who are supporting our educators, to make sure that our students are getting the learning experiences that they deserve. As an office in human capital, we had outlined particular metrics and kind of touch points for ourselves in our work to make sure that we're progressing thoughtfully and meaningfully with these updates. We also elevated the work around revising the instructional framework rubric to be one of our core strategies for this current year. Sorry. Thank you. I wanted to give a bit of background. This has been a very deliberate process. We see observations as a foundation to our employee evaluations for classroom teachers. This is an opportunity to observe their direct delivery of instruction, the relationships and environment that they have created with our students, and to provide feedback on that to help to strengthen and to acknowledge their strengths and the work that they do with our kids. A lot of important discussions starting back in school year 18-19, where we had a monthly work group that was really kind of guiding and setting direction for what we needed to do. We had members of folks across different offices in the district, as well as from BTU, kind of guiding that, as well as gathering stakeholder feedback. When we look at the approach that we took, what we wanted to make sure of is that we also had the infrastructure needed to support training and for stakeholders involved in norming, because that is a place where we want to make sure the language was strong, but also people are prepared to implement and to use the rubric thoughtfully. And so we also had a couple of other bodies of work moving, including an RFP that went forward, where we were able to procure an online learning platform where we can have learning modules available as well as practice videos. And a way to assess and monitor how normed and calibrated our observers are. You'll also see threaded through there is the work around board policy GCO, just in particular knowing that some of the ground rules for how observations are done now live in and are codified in the overarching board policy for evaluation. This year was our foundation year, and we're strong focus on communication and training. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that on the next slide. And just wanted to offer that then looking ahead to next year, right? We didn't want to rush any of these moves, want to be thoughtful and deliberate with them. And so naming that in this 3-year arc, next school year would be the first year that the updated instructional framework rubric would be implemented. So to talk a little bit more about what our focus was for this year, we called it a foundation year. We wanted to build a strong foundation to support the rubric, to support those who use it. We are hopeful for how to help it live out its full potential as a guiding document, again, for strong teacher practice and how we talk about it, name it for folks, support people, give meaningful feedback to folks to help get there, and also to validate and acknowledge when we see it and to celebrate those learning environments that are being created to support our kids. So some of the things, the work of refinements. So although we had been making updates, pardon me, throughout school year 2018-19, we continued to gather stakeholder feedback through January 31st of this year. We established a partnership with an external researcher so that after we had made updates based on the additional 6 months or half of a year of feedback, that they would then come in and look at our rubric, help us think through, make sure it's a valid, strong rubric with hitting on the right teacher behaviors that support student success, and that it's a strong document and behaves the way a strong rubric should. And then in March, we were also conducted a final review with some of the district and union stakeholders and leadership team members who have helped along the way to kind of guide and set direction for our work over the past 2 years. We think about our focus around communication in all of the ways that we were working to gather feedback, and then using that as levers for also communicating to the field about the work that we were doing, our interest in hearing their voice, and just trying to help folks be prepared that there would be some shifts in the rubric. And we had a lot of great opportunity both in our partnership with our communications team and the ways that they were able to help us to get out information, as well as BTU, as they helped to share information through their modes of communication to make sure people were aware of the ways that they could give feedback. Another thing I would offer when we think about stakeholders, we're trying to also connect more deliberately with in-district office. We have heard from teachers and school leaders in the past that there may be ways and times that feedback teachers receive or guidance that school leaders receive might not always feel aligned enough to be helpful. So they might feel like some things are a bit of mixed message around what they should be doing for an observation of a teacher's practice, but then what should they be doing for a school walk or for professional development that's grounded in content and curriculum. And so we've had monthly meetings with the teaching and learning leadership team to help us continue to build those relationships and connections to be more deliberate. And we hope that that's something that our teachers and school leaders experience moving forward in the work. And then making sure that we could share the updated rubric. And so we just this past Monday put out with communications a key shifts overview and the teach indicators and the indicators within the instructional framework rubric was publicized so that folks can see that, and within the next 2 weeks folks will be able to access the full rubric document. And the final thing I'll offer is we've spent this year developing and implementing training, and this is work that will certainly be ongoing. Some of this has involved a norming committee of both internal stakeholders as well as external partners to help develop resources and materials for training, in particular thinking about having master scored videos and resources to help for folks to practice and calibrate, wanting a more consistent lens across the district. As I mentioned, we have our online platform, which has been very helpful for us as a vehicle to get resources out to folks. And then we were also able to have 3 convenings of focus schools. And these were school teams that we co-identified with B2 leadership, hearing from ILEDs, where we are reaching out to some of our school teams where there are some really good things happening in the way that they are providing feedback to staff, where they have structures for informal observations. And what we're really excited about was this opportunity to learn from our own schools, think about strategies or systems that are working and how they can still be improved and how we can work together and learn from each other. And we're interested in how we then can leverage some of the learnings from these convenings to inform the training that we provide for others. So this is just to offer one of the metrics that I had named at the beginning. So we had set a target for ourselves around making sure we're collecting feedback from a range of teachers and school leaders. So what you see in the charts, the green chart lists opportunities for engagement and feedback from school year 18-19. But again, as I mentioned, we really ramped that up in our foundation year. So in the blue chart for school year 19-20. The different opportunities and platforms. We tried to use in-person opportunities. We also acknowledged and understood and heard from the field that in-person could be challenging based on personal commitments. So we also tried to go where people were. So for example, CLN meetings, you'll see if you scroll down a bit, January content PD sessions, partnering teaching and learning folks to help offer some lunch and learn, chew and chat discussions. And we also leveraged online platforms as well. One thing I will offer, I had been really hopeful, and I just want to be, I'm transparent with the group. I've been really hopeful for some success with what we had called Teach Tuesdays, and trying to go through a series where folks could virtually join us and then go through like each teach key action at a time to give feedback, react, ask questions. This did not seem as successful a way for us to engage folks as we had hoped. So I would just say, like, there's some reflection for us and learning around how we could improve and seeing where things were more successful. But I mean, just to say, based on these outreach platforms and avenues and the numbers, we were able to hit both of our targets for engagement with classroom teacher level staff as well as school leaders. This is to give a bit more detail. As I mentioned, we partnered with an external researcher. In particular, it was CTAC. And so a team of 3 folks from CTAC reviewed our rubric, gave feedback to us. And a couple of the things just to name here, they really helped us after we had made updates last year, felt like we were close, put it out, again, until the end of January, got more feedback and saw where maybe we weren't as close as we had thought to the kind of language that felt clear and meaningful and appropriate for the folks who would be really using the rubric. Made edits and then, partnered with CTAC for them to look at this. And they helped us to really refine some of our key shifts and indicator titles, being more clear and concise with what the focus and intent of each of the indicators are. They helped us to really make sure we could articulate the patterns across the levels of performance, what distinguishes a level 1 or a level 2 or level 3 a level of performance for each descriptor. They helped us to become more succinct and help us realize where we're probably overlapping in some of our concepts. And so we consolidated common ideas or themes. Because what we aren't trying to do is create a document that is so lengthy that it feels unmanageable when using it for feedback or for observations. They really helped us to find those common themes to focus the lens for our observers and our educators. I would say in line with that, by consolidating, we were made sure that we were elevating what were those priority items that we would want to see and hope our students experience in learning environments and communities. And just making sure that the progression was very clear for folks. The one thing I try not to often read from my slides, and I was really encouraged and just wanted to offer the quote there comes from CTAC in their review as they summarized after review of our rubric. And they name, that our instructional framework rubric presents carefully considered language describing meaningfully different levels of teaching practice. In general, this language applies broadly to teaching in all content areas and grade levels, provides a strong foundation for reflective practice, professional learning, and organizational decision-making. And this is really important to us because we do want this rubric to be able to stand and be used and to support educator practice, to hear this from external researchers. So I mentioned a key shifts document was shared. It also, again, includes the indicators in our instructional framework rubric. And one of our goals had been to be able to communicate by the end of May. And so we were, off by a calendar day, but it went out, that first communication in June. And one of the things that we had wanted to do, and the reason why we shared these key shifts, is just to think about how we can, at a high level, help folks understand what are some of the changes in the rubric itself. We have a very strong foundation. Sorry. Yes? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought I heard something. There is, we have a very strong foundation with our instructional framework rubric already. It's been in place for 8 years in our district. It gives us language to describe and support highly effective instruction. And so we weren't throwing everything out and starting fresh. And we just want to let folks know here are some of the shifts you could expect to see. And some of them are more about instruction and pedagogical approach. So thinking about making sure it's more clear we're facilitating student learning, being more clear and articulating that it should be grade level or above standards-based instruction for students, finding ways to connect to other city schools' priorities. We now have our blueprint in place. We have, as Commissioner McFadden opened our discussion today with a reminder in our call to equity and an equity policy that charges us with that body of work, and wanting to think about how our rubric can also align to these efforts for our students. And also just making sure that the evidence, that the rubric isn't just a teaching rubric, but really a teaching and learning rubric, thinking about the positive impact on students. In terms of structural shifts, it's more streamlined, as I mentioned, a lot of help from CTAC there, a little bit more of an embedded rationale and purpose statements, trying to help people understand the why of the teacher actions included in the rubric. And we've expanded the number of footnotes and clarifications to try to give folks more examples of the way this could look in different settings. Because we've heard that it can sometimes feel like people are trying to force fit evidence that would work in a 5th grade ELA classroom to an ECE classroom or to a high school fine arts classroom. So we're really trying to acknowledge and broaden the way the evidence could present itself differently. What you see here are, and I'm focusing on the teach key actions. The instructional frame rubric is a cycle of prepare, teach, reflect, and adjust. I have here focusing on the teach key actions, as those are what are leveraged during observations of practice, the focus on the direct delivery of instruction, facilitation of learning, and the learning environment of the classroom when you're in there with teacher and students. So we've focused here. And what you see are the teach key indicators or key actions, followed by a summative statement coming from CTAC's review as they had looked at each of our indicators one by one. And what we see here is, again, the concept of facilitating clear standards-based content learning. Is that clear? It underscores, what that learning needs to be content dependent based on standards. For our Teach 2, talking about focusing on activities and the approach a teacher takes during a lesson to have impact on student learning. And here we're really talking about their strategies and tasks that engage students in rigorous work. I wanted to name for Teach 3 in particular, CTAC had named and offered in their feedback to us. Certainly questioning technique is an essential aspect of teacher practice. We used to talk about questioning in our rubric as evidence dependent. And CTAC had really, pushed us, and even some of their research that they referred to that not all questions require evidence. We also had heard this from some of our teachers and content leads, that having more exploratory questioning could be really appropriate developmentally or based on the content and how to help students unpack their learning. And even Dr. Santelises had mentioned in feedback with Jeremy, just thinking about how, we might have been focusing or forcing folks to a particular kind of question as the right question, when really it is a technique and there might be various types of questions that a teacher would use during a lesson. And so we modified that in response to all that feedback. And you see here now a focus on intentional questioning with the purpose to deepen student learning. So these are our final 4 teach indicators, where we had originally had 9. Again, we prioritized and really elevated 7 teacher behaviors within the teach aspect. One of them, again, around monitoring progress and providing feedback, which is vital to teaching and learning. I would call out, we've often received feedback and some concern from teachers, I'd say in particular around the indicator that focuses on student interactions. And in our previous rubric, we had talked about student to student a lot. And oftentimes teachers felt like they needed to prepare differently to make sure that certain structures like a think, pair, share were evident in their lesson. And what we've tried to do here is to broaden that. The idea is you are facilitating student interactions that could be whole classroom, they could be triads, they could take a lot of forms. And so we tried to make that more clear in our rubric. Because at the end of the day, we do understand that students learning from each other, interacting with each other are key principles for effective teaching. And we didn't want our rubric language to feel like it was forcing people in a particular direction and losing sight of the true intent of student interaction as part of their learning. And then you finally see where we focus on how classrooms and routines are organized to support teaching and being a learning focused classroom. And then really Teach 7, a place that I'm excited about. Our previous rubric had ended with a teach indicator really focused on behavior management. And what we wanted to do, especially after a lot of discussion with folks in the student wholeness office, was to think about how do we avoid feeling too top down with students, too much, even when it is positive behavior that's being reinforced, in those kind of strategies, to keep discussion focused on our young people's behavior and not as much about them as social emotional beings and how they respond and cope to stress or frustration, or the relationships they have with each other, or their own confidence. And so there are shifts in our language in Teach 7 to really highlight those social emotional competencies in a supportive learning community. Here's a place where, when we think about training and preparing our observers to be able to use the rubric with fidelity to apply the language as it's intended. And we have named here, that we have a target of 100% school leaders being successfully qualified as a qualified observer, including a district-wide recertification process, which we have not done in several years. To prepare folks for that, you see that we've outlined a module. We're in the midst of a series of these online modules that are to really help orient our school leaders to the rubric, to focus about key actions and skills as a observer, which include thinking about how they're making sure they have objective evidence, how they gather evidence, being reflective about their own potential observer bias or preferences that could show up in observation. And then getting a little bit more technical, how to navigate the structure of the rubric itself and use it for scoring, for feedback, and really unpacking the language. So these are modules that our school leaders are in the midst of. And because we have our online platform, we've been able to continue to move forward and offer more flexibility in how they access this learning. I did want to give a little bit more detail about our qualified observer recalibration. This is something where it is not about the rubric language itself, although certainly with updates to the language, we want to make sure we are recalibrating and assessing folks. But what I am excited by with this is that we have an opportunity to really bring back our observers together, every one of whom has gone through an initial calibration and assessment, a 3-day professional development, followed by a testing of how well they can apply the rubric with item level accuracy that aligns to a master scored set of videos. But we haven't really brought folks back together after they demonstrate that initial accuracy. And so having updates in the rubric language is exciting. Having the platform available that we can leverage is exciting for us to continue this work. And we now are able to really kind of monitor, and potentially on a more ongoing basis, just kind of like bring folks back together and say, are we looking at the rubric, applying it with a similar lens? One thing I want to offer is that we do know, with everything that is going on, with how to understand instruction and how to prepare for instruction for our students and our communities, trying to think about the many options of what next year can look like. The online platform is giving us a lot of flexibility and ways where we can extend some timelines. And so we're in regular discussion around just what it looks like, so that we're allowing our school leaders to thoughtfully engage in this qualified observer training and recalibration, as well as balance the work they're doing to support schools and instruction.
Jessica, if I just want to let you know that we've reached the 4 o'clock mark, and if we can take about 5 more minutes, if possible, to finish the presentation, so that we can give the commissioners an opportunity for questions if they have them.
Yes, sorry, Commissioner McFadden. Yes, we can do that. This I will just leave here. In the interest of time, what I would offer is that we looked to examples for how to set thresholds or expectations for calibration. And we looked heavily to research stemming from the MET project, and have generally across the board have a higher, more stringent expectation than in their research. And if there are questions that stem from this, I'm happy to answer them later. A moment to pause here is just to name, a lot of my discussion was around the training and the focus with school leaders as the focus. We know and are already engaged in working with folks around the planning for extending and increasing training materials for our teacher level staff and other stakeholders. And so you see here some things that are listed and identified, including a AU course that focuses on unpacking the instructional framework rubric and having updates to that. Working on providing school overview materials that could be available so school teams can be working and discussing around the rubric together. The work we already started with our content teams, just thinking about how they can, not so it supplants the work they have to do around their content and content needs and delivery, but helping to be more explicit with teachers about the connections to the teacher moves described in the rubric and what's being talked about in their content PD. And then looking at how we can pivot some of the materials that we've created for our observers to be self-paced modules in Blackboard for our teachers to take advantage of. There's been ongoing discussion around employee evaluations in general, really stemming from the what we heard from folks in the interest around the board policy work this summer and fall. And that has continued January through June. And while we shifted to virtual discussion, we've still been able to co-facilitate with BTU and continue to talk with stakeholders on a range of topics related to evaluations. And so I wanted to make sure to provide that update for the board as well. Just knowing how critical it is that we continue this dialogue with folks who are impacted by the work. And then this should be the last slide. The other thing I want to name and offer is that we exist, we are within another ecosystem, which is MSCE and the state's requirements. There's been some work that the state has been doing around adjustments to principal and teacher evaluations. Some resulted in shifts to COMAR language or guidance for principal evaluations. There may be some that are coming for teacher evaluations. Anything we've seen so far and the opportunities we've had to give input with our partners at MSDE, we have fully engaged in. And it seems like we are, in line with any shifts or things that they are talking about. But I did just want to name for the board that if any new information were to come up that becomes a state requirement, we would certainly work to make sure that the board, and as we work with our union partners, that folks are aware and we're working together around that. And so please let me know if there are any questions, and I appreciate the additional minutes that you gave me.
Thank you for the presentation, Jessica. To my fellow commissioners on the committee, are there any questions for this presentation?
No, I don't have any questions at this moment. Thank you.
I don't have any questions either, Commissioner McFadden.
I don't have a question. I just want to commend and thank you for addressing many of the issues that we did here earlier in the year when we were talking about the policy and the clarification, or especially around the recertification process. I think that was an important piece. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Jessica, on slide 2, I'm curious to know that 10% of principals would roughly be, can you explain this to just a little bit further as far as metric B and the feedback that was given? 10% of principals, 5% of teachers, of classroom teachers by March 1st. It seems like a small amount of folks, and I know that it was planned. You all planned the amount. I'm just curious to know how well-rounded is the feedback that we received if we're looking at 10% of principals, which I would assume to be maybe 13 or 14, maybe around that area, and then 5% of those teachers. Is that feedback, would you say, equally dispersed? And with those numbers, do we have a balance of feedback from the elementary level and from the secondary level?
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of for what the numbers result in, when we look at the targets that we had set, for the school leaders, and it was including principals and assistant principals. So my apologies for, I think I shortened it too quickly. To hit that target would mean hearing from 37 school leaders in those roles. And we heard from, not including 2018-19 engagement, we heard from 115 from the November CLN session. So that's when the school leaders come together as school teams. We can visit them, as well as their responses to indicator by indicator review within Blackboard. So an online way for folks to engage as well. We were able to work with elementary and secondary CLNs and to hear from folks. So I do believe that that was a representative range for our school leaders. One reason why their target is a higher percentage is it's a smaller population that we're talking about. So where to hit that target would be 37 people. And again, we about tripled it. 5%, pardon me, of classroom teachers would be over 240 classroom teachers. So it'd be more individual voices, but we also know we're trying to like hear from a much larger population, as you mentioned. And we were able to hear from, again, just looking at 1920 through the in-person, the Teach Tuesdays, SL ambassadors who are teacher level staff across schools, the January Content PD and the online survey. We heard from over 290 teachers. Yes, I believe that it is, we heard from secondary, from elementary, different grade bands. I think one of our best opportunities was actually the SLO ambassador meeting, because there are folks identified across each school who serve in teacher leader roles. One thing that I will say is that I do always wonder about first some of our content areas once we start to disaggregate even further. If there could be some places where we may have wanted to or had hoped we could have heard from more. None immediately come to mind, but I did want to acknowledge that. But in terms of grade band structure.
I know that a challenge often is with special area teachers, the co-curricular teachers. I would be interested to hear some of their feedback because the teaching and learning in those spaces, it looks different than it would in one of the core content areas, as we like to say. So I would be interested to hear that feedback from them.
Yep, and again, so we heard directly from hundreds of teachers, and what you remind me of, and I did not talk about a lot here, but we are working on today's our first session actually with content teachers joining us. Content specific look for appendix documents. We've never had an approach where we had a different rubric for every content area, but we have heard from folks that evidence may present differently. Our content teams have spent several months drafting look for documents, and we are now launching a process over the next several weeks to engage teachers in those content areas to specifically give feedback. So I think I'm hopeful that in that place, they can really lend those specific examples of what good evidence would look like in their settings.
I love that. And then on slide 10, I'm curious to know if all of our observers, if they have completed the recertification to date, have they? And then perhaps maybe some of them who have not completed it, I don't know. But if they haven't, I know that some of the plan is to help them between now and the start of the new school year. I think I saw that, in the appendix. But did all of our observers complete that recertification process just yet?
Thank you for your question. No, they have not. We have had to extend some of the windows for participating in the training and the preparation as folks had to shift to move their schools to virtual learning environments. So they have not. What we're looking at is leveraging through the summer to be able to allow for folks to finish that and to go through the calibration assessment, making sure that they would be able to, before serving as an observer, have completed and been successful. We are still working with Colleen, who has facilitated the training thus far to certify observers, to make sure that it is in her scope of work with us, that there will be time set aside, whether it is in person, mixed modal, or all virtual, but to be able to do a deeper dive with those folks who are not successful when they first go through the video assessment, so that everyone will be ready to be an observer. But yeah,
Thank you. And I know Chief Grant Skinner came on. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything before we moved on.
I think you covered it. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you for the information, Jessica.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the questions and the interest. I know there are many things the board needs to focus on, and I really appreciate it.
So I see on the screen that we're moving to the recovery plan discussion now.
Hi, Commissioner McFadden. Are you ready for me to go ahead and start?
I am. Is this Dr. Wu? Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you? Good afternoon, Teaching and Learning Committee members. Thank you for making the time for this discussion. And as I think many of you know, we Teaching and Learning, just because of the timing, happened to be the last committee. We've done this discussion with the Policy Committee and the Operations Committee about 2 weeks ago now. And so we wanted to make sure that we did this, had this discussion and brainstorm session with each of the board committees, because there are obviously particular components that would be relevant and of interest for the different committees based on their perspective of the work. Yes.
Since we all, I believe, have been through the presentation in other committees, can we just open up for the discussion question on slide 5? Those, can we get there?
Yeah, absolutely.
There were some things that you just had to cover prior to those questions on the end.
Nope. If all of the committee members have the context and want to go straight to the questions, definitely open to that. I think the only thing I will add is that given that it has been 2 weeks since we did the update with the policy and the operations committee, there has been a lot of recovery planning work that has started. We have staff working through thinking about these different components of the recovery planning, and we are also in the process of really standing up some really robust stakeholder engagement as a part of this process, because we believe that that is really important, making sure that we have the opportunity for staff as well as families and community members to be giving us feedback as we are and input as we are going through this process. So I won't go into detail on that today, but that is something I just wanted to let the board members know, that in the time since we spoke about this with policy and operations committee, it's something that we are very invested in making sure that we stand up quickly and robustly over the course of the next few weeks. So with that, I think I will open up the floor for any of the board committee members to ask any questions or make any comments regarding these questions that we have for the Teaching and Learning Committee. I think in particular around important things that we should be taking into consideration from a teaching and learning perspective as we plan to really accelerate student learning in the fall, I think is a particular question that we would be really interested to hear the committee members share any thoughts or insight about. So I will mute myself so I can also be taking some notes, but obviously we'll jump back in if there's a response that's needed for anything.
I appreciate that. And I am remiss, Dr. Bondima, because I assumed that we all had gone through, and I was remiss to remember that this is your committee on strategic planning. So what I'll do is actually start with you with questions, if you have any, in regards to the recovery plan and particularly slide 5.
Well, I did have, thank you, Commissioner McFadden. I did have a few questions, and I don't even know if all the questions have been answered, but it's things that's been lingering, you know, as we go through this whole process and being at home and online with our students. I have a great concern from past experiences of being concerned with teachers being online, especially if this is a new experience for them. And not being very clear of how they are making out, because teaching online, hybrid classes and teaching online is something that's extremely new, not only for our students and for our teachers here in Baltimore, but across the country, it's all new. And I've been very curious, wondering how our teachers and our students are really doing, because going online straight from site on-site teaching and then switching in a short period of time online is very complicated. And I have some sympathy for people who not had that experience. And I was wondering if you could give me a quick overview of how, for what you've seen, and how they're doing, and what recommendations would you have, and where we are at this point, and are we learning something new with this process, because we all had to do something suddenly, and I just want to know where we are with that.
Sure. I think a couple of things in response to that. I think there is a range of what's happening out there. I think we've heard some really positive stories around a lot of innovative things that have been happening, and things that we're learning, particularly around certain groups of students where, for example, there is a really great fifth grade math teacher in a particular CLN, and we're trying to do a pilot now of having more students be able to engage with that particular teacher in learning fifth grade math, and finding ways for maybe those students' teacher of record to support maybe smaller groups within that larger group. So I think there are ways in which there are some teachers and students who are really thriving in this kind of distance learning environment. Another example is the Eager Street program, where we have our incarcerated youth. They were able to access curriculum and content in a way, and get credits for dual enrollment. And these are students who previously, we had essentially failed, and now they're in a place where they are actually thriving. And so I think we are seeing that there are ways in which the distance learning is actually has been a great opportunity for some students, and we are going to try and leverage the things that we have learned in those situations to be able to carry them forward as we think about and plan for the fall and the future of what education looks like here. And I think that's true in other places around the country as well. Another thing I will point out is I mentioned the stakeholder engagement piece of this at the beginning, and the other thing we are also doing is we will be sending out and engaging with both families, parents, and staff and teachers around what this experience has been like for them so far, to try and get a sense of what things have worked, what things have been challenging, and so we can also use that to build on as we do future planning. So I think that hopefully partially answers your question, but we are going to continue to gather the data on that to be able to share that.
I do. Thank you. do have another question. Have you thought about the fact that there's programs out there, such as Quality Matters? I'm sure that some of you might be familiar with Quality Matters, where it's directly related to working with teachers to make sure that they are putting in place all of the pieces that's necessary for online teaching. And even though we hear that some people are doing well, some people aren't, I think it's absolutely critical that that we include in our professional development, and it will cost, I'm sure, programs that will allow the teacher or help the teacher to put her instructional materials online and work with the students and making sure that they are clear about what online teaching is about. Even though we know that many of the teachers are doing well, is because some of them already knew what online teaching was about. So I think that is a critical piece that we need to incorporate into professional development. Consultants who bring in programs to work with every single teacher, so whatever the situation is in the fall or in the future, we will be prepared and ready to put it in place with our students, our administrators, and our staff.
If I could just jump in a minute, Commissioner Bondima, this is Janice Lane, ED of Teaching and Learning. I think those are great suggestions and pieces that we have been following along. As Dr. Wu indicated, some of the ongoing feedback that happens via Dr. Santelisa's Facebook check-ins. Our content teams are running ongoing check-ins across the academics office and really looking at what are some of those opportunities for ongoing professional learning, not just in technology, but how is it coupled with the content, so that as teachers are engaging with students, they're seeing the both and opportunity, and just monitoring the ongoing successes that teachers are having. So creating some professional learning communities where teachers are sharing with teachers the practices that they've seen. We know we still have room to grow in that, so we're hoping to do some more of that across summer school learning, so that when we launch in the fall, for whatever our plan looks like to start off, that we'll also be able to think about the content learning with the technology and how that couples to ensure students are getting the highest quality instruction.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McFadden.
Madam Board Chair, please forgive me, because as I know that you are the chair of all of these things, you're technically on all of the committees. I was remiss to know that this is your primary committee that you serve on. So I'm going to extend now to you questions and things that you have. It crossed my brain. I'm just like, well, she knows everything. She's a part of all of the committees and groups. But I'm going to extend it. I'm going to extend it to you now, also for your questions or things that you have before I go to Commissioner Roberts.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I don't know as much as you may think I do, but I'm learning. Commissioner Bondima brought up the first issue that I had, and I just lost all my notes that I wanted to talk from. One of the other areas that was around the professional development, especially with distance learning, and just I think almost a requirement now that all of our teachers and staff, instructional staff, need to have some familiarity with that. I'm really concerned with, and in terms of when we discuss recovery, is the piece of what we're going to do that will be I don't want to just use the word tutorial, but the additional assistance that some students may need, where I know some have really blossomed with the online. Other students, we know, for whatever reasons, have not had the opportunity to work either with packets or with the online learning, and are really going to have some gaps. And so I really want to know the types of strategies that we're putting together beyond just the in-school instructional time that will begin to address some of those. I know that we're looking at some ways of looking at volunteers that might help to be tutors, but that's an area for me, both whether it's an after school, if we have after school, or if that can be an online experience as well, or what that might look like. So I'm just going to open it up. I don't necessarily have all the answers. One that is interesting to me, and I've seen now an editorial, even in the Sun, from a person, was the use of some of the retired educators in the area who might be willing to do that, but it would require some preparation, some training, some orientation to what we would want them to do.
I'd like to get another chance after Commissioner Roberts has the opportunity. Commissioner McFadden.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I didn't know if you were finished. I didn't know if you were opening that up for someone to respond back to you.
I was opening it up, but I can give my other one, and then if folks want to respond, fine. I was opening it up. I thought we were this was like more of a brainstorming type of conversation, but that's one. The other area that I still have is the one around accessibility, because it does seem as though we're having some type of a hybrid And then maybe this is really a question as to where we are now and where, and I know we're working toward getting devices if students need them, but where are we in terms of being certain that there will be the accessibility across the city? I've seen where some of the libraries are, allowing folks to use their perimeter, but that's going to be a really important thing as we move into the next year also. So I'll stop there. If there are either answers or discussions about it, that's fine.
Can I get another chance after Dr. Robert, Commissioner Roberts?
Sure. I wanted to make sure that if there was any discussion for Commissioner Chinya's points, I want to make sure that we hit on those. And I see Chief Davis has joined us. Are you about to answer or chime in?
I can start, and then I can also turn it over to John and Janice. I think that Commissioner Chinya, those are absolutely areas that we are planning to dig into as a part of our work. First, being able to identify what kinds of assessments we need to determine where students are when they return to school, to identify what kinds of supports they need is a critical part of the work that we're doing as we're doing this planning. And then to be able to differentiate that, right, based on what needs students have, and then what are the different types of opportunities, whether, to your point, it's in school or after school, that we identify, those supports potentially with volunteers, potentially with our staff, and, our staff potentially doing different kinds of things during the day. So I think those are absolutely things that we are looking at. In terms of your second question about accessibility, we are also continuing to determine devices that need to go out to students, as well as looking at the internet question and the access to internet for students as well as a part of our planning. So those are definitely areas that we are exploring as a part of our planning, but thank you for raising those for us to make sure that we are really thinking through those. I don't know if Janice or John have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. I think not only what I got, Commissioner Chinya, out of your question was around students that have fallen behind and that have struggled with reading and math, for instance. But we are looking a little bit holistically with kind of other populations of students too, right? Students that are in transition grades, 6th and 9th grade, for instance, what additional would they need? Along with students that have IEPs and students that are English language learners. And I just kind of bring those two up because we're really looking at different populations and how we can help them, no matter if they come into school twice a week, once a week, should they come in extra, right? Depending on what the hybrid model is. And so I think we've got to kind of put all of that together and then get to what I thought was more your direct point. What are we going to do with them? What are the resources we're going to provide to them so that they can catch up? Janice, you might want to chime in here too.
Sure, thank you. I would just add to that we are utilizing many of the instructional tools that we have that actually can do some recovery and acceleration based on where students are. As Dr. Wu indicated, some of that beginning diagnostic information will be helpful to target where students are, because the other thing we want to make sure is that we don't slide backwards and just assume that all kids had loss. But we want to make sure that we have grade level instruction and then the additional instruction, whether that's remediation or acceleration, that happens for students based on need. And there are online platforms that will allow some of that work to be happening. For example, in our early grades right now, we have Amplify, where families have digital access for students to do 10 to 15 minutes a day to continue learning phonics and word skills that are happening versus closing that up for students. We're looking with our partners to continue that work, not just over summer, but really now that we'll have more devices in students and families' hands with the accessibility, is how does that become part of the ongoing learning moving forward? For both the virtual and the hybrid, as well as whatever new school looks like when we go back in to the four walls, are ways that we can offer some of that personalized learning for students to continue to build skills and strategies.
I would also suggest that we, I mentioned volunteers, but we also may want to look at the other partners. I mean, once students begin to return to school, in some cases, they're going to be the partners. For example, the daycare, aftercare providers, and others that probably need to be in the loop in terms of helping to assist. Even if a student has a online program, they may still need to have some support with that. So I would hope that we also include those folks in possible conversations around what this might mean.
Absolutely. That's a great point. We have had several conversations with current partners that stay in existence, like tutor partners, some of the retired folks that work with additional programming, but there's always room for opportunity for folks to help us. So thank you for that.
Is it okay that Chairperson McFadden?
Go ahead, Dr. Bondima, go ahead.
I just wanted to bring out a point, though, so a quick point about when we're out there recruiting and hiring new teachers and new faculty, new staff. I hope that we are including them in our professional development for a hybrid and distant learning consulting, and because many people, when we talk about bringing back retired teachers or retired principals, we have to remember that we have to also include them in our professional development, because this is new, and we want to make sure that they're prepared for our students coming back in the fall, if that's what's going to happen. And so I think that we need to make sure we keep that in mind, because I do know that some people have problems with distance learning, so we really need to incorporate that in our professional development for our new and incoming teachers and administrators.
Absolutely.
That's a great point, Dr. Bondima. Both if we're considering retired and even folks that may even have just graduated from a teacher prep program, or folks that are transferring, this is new for a lot of folks. So it's important that we figure out a way to embed that development in for them as well, especially as we're hiring new folks. Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. I think this would be a part two to something that Madam Chair said earlier about assessing the students in the fall, essentially on where they stand. According to the PQS memo, as we move forward with contracts and partnering with different vendors, we are really only partnering with companies that can offer services exclusively online to the students. And so I wonder what considerations are being made around being intentional with those vendors that can partner with schools that can offer a less monotonous type of instruction for the students. So the distance learning is actually evolving, and it's not the same distance learning experience that the students are having during this period that we're able to kind of integrate in what we're learning during this period. At some point, integrating in the vendors to offer these individualized experiences with the instructors at the various schools that can accommodate the different levels that the students will present in the fall. But how intentional do we plan to be with only providing contracts to companies, consultants, in any contracts really, that can only offer services virtually?
So I don't know if any of you want to address Commissioner Roberts now, or when we get to the procurement section of today's agenda, because I know that question is relative to the board letters that we received for procurement also. So Commissioner Roberts, do you mind that, or do you want a response now as it relates to recovery?
No, I don't mind that. I think it's applicable to both, and it's a continued conversation, so I don't mind at all.
I would just add, Commissioner McFadden and Commissioner Roberts, that has been ongoing conversations with anyone that we have procurement coming up with, is one, understanding the types of services they offer. So if it's a traditional relationship that we've had with a vendor and a partner that was typically face-to-face, then we go back in and look at what are their offerings that have been updated either virtually. We don't want to go one way or the other where it's all just virtual or all just face-to-face, but really investigating what is the learning and then what is the professional learning that is required to support folks for implementation around that. So when we look at things like later today, you'll see letters as one of our procurement pieces, one of the items of how are we providing virtual training? And if we can't have face-to-face, how can we push in different opportunities within that? So most of the time what's happening is we're meeting with each of those vendors, again, whether they're new vendors or whether they're continued partnership, to really look at their services across 3 applications, right? Totally hybrid, totally virtual, a hybrid, or back to some sort of face-to-face instruction to ensure that what we're committing to is something that supports both teachers and students.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Is that it, Commissioner Roberts?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. I just have a couple, and I'll probably end up sending more of them than we'll ask today or things that we'll talk about today. But in looking at a potential hybrid model, what still goes to my brain and something for us to take into consideration are the barriers that our young people will still have in that hybrid type of space, given the inequities that already exist in our city when it comes to technology, and as Commissioner Chinya said, the accessibility. What will transportation look like for our young people if we were to do a hybrid? It's just something that I think about, and them getting to school, if they're going to a building some days and then being on a device some days, just how are we going to work? And this is just maybe more philosophical, but how are we going to work to eliminate the barriers in a hybrid model, in a, what is it called, a phase 2, right? How would we do that? And then the new normal I get once we get there, but I just think about those barriers, particularly going back to what both Dr. Bondima and Commissioner Chinya were talking about as far as professional learning. I'm curious to know how we're capturing formative data from teachers right now, getting their feedback to actually know what is working, what's not working. I know that a lot of lives are happening. A lot of open dialogue forums are happening, but are we capturing that information in a way formalized, standardized to kind of move us forward? I think the voices from the field are the most important as we're, determining next steps. And I'm just curious to know how we're receiving feedback from teachers to kind of move us forward with any type of recovery plan. Something that we don't have to address now, but I just want to ask a couple of them just to keep them on the radar, just to do that. Also, I'm concerned about how we're going to measure student achievement, right? I know that standardized tests, they have been like waived and taken away from this school year, but as we move forward, what are our plans to now measure student achievement? How is dialogue being opened? Similar to a platform like this, but how is it being opened for us to now move forward? Are there perhaps ways that we were assessing student achievement that we no longer need to think about, and what maybe are some new ways that we can measure the success of our young people, especially as we're in this space of learning loss and then also acceleration? How are we going to measure student achievement? Are we opening up dialogue to determine new ways? And then I also want to think about, yes, there is technical skills that teachers and staff and administrators and leaders need, but what about the SEL proficiency training for our teachers, our administrators? I appreciate the updates that we get from Chief Davis often that goes out to school leaders. And, some school leaders we're not being as graceful, apparently, as some others. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to really focus on social emotional learning and development for our teachers and our administrators as we move forward, and for our students as well. Perhaps heightening that now that we're in a global health crisis, and we're in a bunch of other crises in our country. I just think about that. And then finally, I know that there are board letters that talk about coaching, and we went through the instructional framework today, but I'm still curious to know what coaching, evaluation, and the appraisal process will look like moving forward. As we just went through the instructional framework, as we move forward, how are school leaders going to observe teachers, offer them feedback, coach them now that we're in a virtual space? Not sure how much of that has been happening now, seeing as though there are certification requirements and things that have been waived throughout the state. I just wonder how we're going to move forward with that. So those are some things that I have. If they can come back to me, maybe not in this setting because we have a couple other things to do, but those are kind of my thoughts as we move forward. And I'm sure more will come out of conversation as we move ahead, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Chief Davis, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on anything right now, or if it can all just come back to me later.
I mean, it might have to come back later. I wrote down 4 different types of questions that you asked. I will say that feedback from teachers, I mean, we are going to hold focus groups and do a number of different things to get as much information as possible. And I think what is also heartwarming is, you know, as I send out emails to teachers on Fridays and ask for their feedback, they just bring it right back to me. And we're trying to figure out what the themes are all around that. So there's a bunch of different ways, and I think we have got to do that this month to really influence our final plan. So I want to be completely aligned with that thinking. I think maybe a couple of, I mean, I think your student achievement question is a good one, and probably one I don't have the best answer for at this time, to be very honest with you. The SEL question is another one where I feel like teachers have thrown all in, and so have our Office of the Whole Child, because the resources we put out on a daily basis, or excuse me, on a weekly basis, that really give teachers the opportunity to ask specific questions, prompts, have a theme for the week, have been utilized by a great number of them. And I've gotten a lot of feedback on that. That's probably where I've gotten the most feedback around all the work that we're doing. So I think that will absolutely continue. And I think your point around how do we push that in the summer for our school leaders and for everyone else is also the appropriate question. There was a lot of thought about the coaching process and the feedback that we give teachers. And I'll be honest with you, and all commissioners, like about a month ago, we thought about putting something out to principals that said, here's the right process and here's the right feedback you should be giving folks. But we held back on that because I think we still have to be more in the observation mode right now. We do have to get to a point of using our leadership using our instructional framework and adapting it to this virtual space, and then ensuring that our school leaders and instructional coaches give feedback aligned to that. So I want to come, your question is one that has been percolating a lot because principals are used to giving feedback and they want to do that right now. And they've been doing that ongoing, and they work with the ILED to make sure that it has enough grace in this space, while at the same time trying to push the best possible situations in this virtual learning that we're at.
I appreciate that, Chief. So that is it for me, and I believe that is it for recovery. Dr. Wu, I appreciate you doing this and making sure that you're in all of these committees so that we can have some well-rounded discussion. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all of you, all of the staff that's here today to support this. We're ready to move on to the annual middle and high school choice process and results. I believe this is Dr. Pfeiffer who will be presenting to us today. Or Chief High Cupboard. I see a bunch.
Sir. Chief High Cupboard and Brandon Tillman.
Hey there.
Hi, how's everybody doing? So we're happy to come today to talk about the annual middle school and high school choice process. I want to just put some framing remarks to the group, and then I'm going to let Brandon Tillman, who's Director of Enrollment Choice and Transfer, actually lead the presentation. So first off, I want folks to understand that we have set a goal for the year upcoming, and we've already started the process of reimagining ECT, right? What does enrollment choice and transfer look like for the district? How do we provide a higher quality of customer service, both for our families and for our students, and making sure that the systems in place work best for our families, our principals, our schools, et cetera. So we're in the process of doing that. So understand that this is a report on this past year's work as a sort of status quo, but that we are in an evolution standpoint. I also want to acknowledge that the ECT team has been working really tirelessly at trying to stand up both our pre-K and K online enrollment, as well as having to think through coming up how our summer transfer window will be managed moving forward, given the current closure and not being able to see folks in person. You know, we see up to 10,000 families during the summer months for transfer. So thinking through all of that, along with reimagining how our transfers actually take place so that it, again, is more equitable and thoughtful for our principals, teachers, students, et cetera. That being said, we also wanted to reimagine the choice process. And so we are focusing on that for the upcoming school year. We're just not there yet. So as you think about this and ask questions, I would offer that your thoughts about how to improve our process will be helpful for us as we think about our reimagining, and also doing this, frankly, in a different space when we do probably have to do it virtually in the fall as well. That being said, I also want to make one note that this timing of this report, we've actually adjusted for next year's calendar, because the report comes at a time when we've just closed out our round 2 of choice. So we don't actually have the full data to share with you right now. We'll give you what we have. We're happy to come back to you another time, or just give you a report on the round 2 choice information. But this one right now really covers mostly around round one. The next report will be situated later in the summer months so that we can obviously give you a better, fuller picture of the choice process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Tillman, who is our fantastic director for ECT, who's going to give you the data of the district choice process. Brandon?
Sure. Before he does that, I am going to ask, to your point, that can we get that written update after that second round? And if today can just be an overview pretty much of where we are now. We don't necessarily have to go through all of this, as we do want a more full picture once that second round happens. So I appreciate the calendar update that you just mentioned, and making sure that this presentation is timed right next year, so that we can, have a robust understanding of the process. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely, and a fuller picture of the data. Absolutely, we'll get you a written report, no problem. Okay, Brandon.
Sure. Good afternoon, commissioners, cabinet leaders, and colleagues. I'm Brandon Tillman from the Office of Enrollment Choice and Transfer, also joined today by Dominic Bivens, who serves as our lead for middle and high school choice. Our presentation today will be brief, but covers kind of 5 different components. The overall understanding of how the process works, supports that we have in place to assist families in understanding and navigating choice, a spotlight on our middle and closing school choice processes, a little overview of the data on first round participation and placement outcomes, and of course, lessons learned and opportunity areas for growth for the coming year. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so early engagement is key. So whether for middle or high school choice, we want to stress to families that it's never too early to begin planning and preparing to navigate the choice process. So through various focus groups for families, we have heard that while it's an exciting time, choice can also be a stressful and sometimes confusing element, especially if waiting until the 5th or 8th grade to begin the planning process. So what we have been charged to do is really to prioritize partnership opportunities with families towards the academic successes of their children, and really focusing on utilizing our dedicated staffing at district office and in the schools that are prioritizing this early engagement of families. Our targeted grade levels, of course, are our 3rd and 4th grade, as well as our 6th and 7th grade, really focusing on building relationships with student and families, hosting sessions and opportunities to share with families about the available tools that we have that will help them in researching different school options based upon their students' talents and interests and passions. And then also exploring student goals and really trying to align that with the programmatic options of the schools that they're interested in possibly attending. Next slide. So as we think about this particular slide, this focuses on the actual timeline that our 5th and 8th grade families go through. Again, the process starts right after the back to school element of school appears. And we think about September and October as being really the time that we want schools to host open houses, shadow days, and other engagement activities for families to allow those families to meet staff members, to interact with current students and current families, and really to learn more about that school and the different academic and extracurricular programs that they have available. Again, we also, as a district office team, we collaborate with different departments to host information sessions within the community, also to annually release a choice guide. Mr. Bivens will talk more about that, but this year we released 2 versions, one dedicated directly for middle school families and one dedicated for high school families, as well as the hosting of our annual middle and high school choice fair. Of course, our annual applications are due in January, and our first round letters are usually mailed out the first week of March.
And talking about how the choice process works, students are able to choose up to 5 schools and put them on their application. And this year was the 2nd year in a row that students and families have been able to complete the application online through our parent portal via Infinite Campus. Students rank their choices from their most preferred site to lowest. Schools that have an entrance criteria, those students are ranked based on their composite score. And for our other schools, we have a lottery. Once we have all the applications in, a matching algorithm is run, and we have about a 65 to 75% rate in which students get into their first or second choice. As we talk about the improved choice supports, I'm going to be talking briefly in these 4 buckets around early outreach, stakeholder engagement, our professional learning opportunities we offer to staff around this process, and technology access for families. So every school has someone we call a choice liaison, and that is somebody appointed by school leadership to support families as they navigate through the choice process. They counsel students around the process, organize and arrange visits to schools, and connect families with the information around this process. This year, in collaboration with FCE, we created a SharePoint for choice liaisons to use to access tools and resources to support families in this process. As Mr. Tillman stated earlier, this year we had a high school, we had 2 choice guides, one for middle school and one for high school. Based on our feedback from families, particularly our families that are, have students transitioning to middle school, having it all in one guide was a little cumbersome and not helpful to those families in particular. At the Choice Fair, we had about 3,000, 4,000 students and families attend. This year at the fair, we had kiosks where families could not only find out about their child's composite scores, but also complete that online application that I was talking about earlier. So we had staff and kiosks there available for families on site to do that. Also this year, we've had multiple engagement and learning and training opportunities with the choice liaisons. Even amidst this COVID crisis, we had a virtual session with choice liaisons, supporting them as they help families navigate the second round, again, through the COVID crisis we're currently experiencing. Lastly, in regards to our enhanced communication supports, we've had a lot of outreach as it relates to the choice fair and the choice process with our different schools. We've connected with other partners such as 92Q before the choice fair. We had them visit one of our schools and kind of promote the choice fair and let families know what to expect and things of that nature, as well as working with different community-based organizations such as Keys over West in helping get families access to information around this process. Additionally, we have two of the targeted supports strategies that we've had this year have been around the middle school choice process and supporting students going through and families going through that process, as well as closing school choice process. For our middle school, it works a little differently than high school. Some of our fifth graders have a sixth grade seat available to them or have a zone middle school to attend. Some of our fifth graders do not. Those fifth graders that do not have a set zone middle school, we consider those our priority ones, fifth graders. And then that priority two group are those fifth graders that have a seat but want to look at different options. So all of our fifth graders can participate in the process, but we definitely prioritize those students that based on where they live, they don't have a set zone middle school, and encourage them to participate in the process.
Sure. So as we take a look over the past few years, we will see that we've had a reduction in the number of school options that families have available to them within the middle school choice process. So to kind of combat that particular issue, we worked with a number of offices here in city schools and also various school principals to really analyze enrollment trends, to kind of take a look at family enrollment preferences, and then of course seat capacity options in our schools. And we were able to add additional options for families throughout different parts of the city for this particular year. As you will see on the slide, those are the different schools that we were able to add as options for families to choose from within the choice process. Next slide. So as we think about the closing school, whenever there's a decision for a school to close, a special choice process is launched to ensure that all schools are placed. As we think about this during this particular time, our specialists really look at student transcripts. They work with families and have kind of in-person meetings. They host school rallies in conjunction with the principals of these schools to kind of just highlight the process and kind of to get families and students and administrators, everybody on the same accord about different options that are available to students. The COVID-19 health crisis did require us to shift a few things. We had started the process, so we had already been in school, we had already been meeting, but certainly we had some other engagement activities planned that we weren't able to do in person. But to kind of, shift as a result of the COVID crisis, we were able to create an online application process for families. We hosted virtual sessions with families. Of course, we worked with our communication team to kind of engage families through robocalls, direct emails, and also postal mail. And then also worked with the school-based team, our administrators, our teachers and counselors, as they were working to support remote learning. They were also reminding families about the need to submit the application for the closing school processes. We expect letters will reach families next week.
So in these next few slides, we're going to look at, after the process has been run for the first round, what our participation rates have been and what were the results of the placements from that first round of the choice process. As you can see, for high school choice, we had a slight increase in the number of applications received and the participation rate amongst our eligible students. And as it relates to students being placed at their first or second choice, we see that students were placed at 71%, which is in line with my earlier slide around the general placement for students through the first round of choice. With, as Mr. Tillman mentioned earlier, we've seen a decline in choice sites over the past several years for a variety of reasons. This year, we added those additional K-8 sites to, for families to choose from. And we see that we got an increase in applications, and we're able to prevent the participation rate from declining further from this first round for our middle school students. And we also see that through the middle school choice process, about 67% of our students were able to be placed at their first or second choice. And again, by adding those additional sites, we were able to decrease the number of students that are unplaced through this process. And here we can see all the middle school options that were available and the number of seats available. And we were able to, again, by offering seats at our various K-8s, increase the number of seats that were available through the process. The Board of Commissioners asked us to look at first choice assignments based off of race, ethnicity, and zip code. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little about our findings around that. We can see that about 73% of students that were accepted to their first round were African American, which is in line with our demographics as a district, where we have about 75% African American students in our district. So that data kind of correlates between who's got accepted to their first round and our demographics. And it's a similar case with our Hispanic population being accepted to their first round choice. We see is about 15%, which also correlates with our district's percentage of students that identify as Hispanic. Where we saw a bit of a difference in the correlation between population and students assigned to their first choice was with our white population of students. We see that about 23% of our white students were accepted to their first choice, which doesn't quite correlate with our population of white students, which is about 77% of our student population. And looking at the zip code, if students placed at their first choice by zip code and by race and ethnicity, I also wanted to look at those schools that had the largest number of students assigned to their first choice on the choice application, because I think this information is important, as well as our students don't always attend the school where they live. And so I think where they're attending school also impacts whether or not they're getting into that first or second choice on their choice application. And we see with the schools listed that there's a diversity in the different types of schools where students are getting into their first choice. We have some charter schools, we have some traditional K-8s, we have some students that are coming from private and parochial schools that are getting into their first choice. Next slide, I'm sorry.
So as we think about middle and high school choice and kind of taking a look towards the future, we can go to the next slide. we can see, we want to really give a highlight on the COVID-19 and how we were impacted. And we were fortunate in that there was minimal impact to the choice process for this particular year. And we already talked about kind of, we extended application dates, we utilized an online platform, and of course our partnerships and leveraging such relationships with community partners were able to help us avoid any major interruptions with timelines or the experiences of families. But for the coming year, we are in the process of really working to analyze a few things regarding the process. One of those things is interest criteria and composite score calculations, kind of how we will approach outreach and engagement with families, especially if we have to do so in a virtual format. Looking at the mapping that was on there about the zip codes where people are coming from, we see that there is some equity concerns that we want to address, of really focusing on specialized geographical opportunities to work with families to really increase their understanding and participation in the choice process. We know that we have to do some marketing and promotional assistance for some of our schools, especially those schools that are not seeing the success that those schools that we listed on the slides, really to see how we can examine processes and kind of implement them in those particular schools. And then also really looking at the choice fair format. Certainly we know that the health and government restrictions that we've been under, so kind of, what does that look like in terms of bringing 3,000 to 4,000 families together in the winter months for around the choice fair? So what other opportunities do we have or can be put in place to really engage our families around school options? So certainly as we have made strides in really creating educational choices for families throughout the city, we know that some of our participation data really shows that we have some work ahead to really ensure that choices are accessible to all families. So this slide kind of talks about kind of the key buckets that we want to really target: being intentional and engaging staff and families about the overall process, building relationships and supporting school students and families with training and resources around choice. Also working to really ensure high quality and preferred programs are available and accessible throughout the city, and really simplifying ways for families to learn about those programs and to select them as options for their students. And then also, of course, leveraging partnerships, tools, and resources to really remove information and preparation barriers for our families. We feel that if we can really focus on these key areas, families will be engaged, empowered, and equipped with the necessary information to really prepare and navigate choice. The next slide. So certainly, as we focus on equity and how timely this subject is, we really want to make sure that we are centering equitable access in our all of our choice and enrollment processes and practices. So as we think about such, we know that our students, really are inspired to reach potential and pursue their passions. Of course, when we're able to put them in engaging, safe, and supportive environments that will foster their well-being and help them meet academic and social-emotional success. So as we think about that, we know that we want to really look at utilizing our choice and enrollment data to really be considerations in the portfolio review process, and working with that particular team to help that guide some of the decisions that are made regarding our policies and programming and just overall school portfolio. Really focusing on improving middle grade supports around the academic and socio-emotional needs of our students, and also expanding access to those seats across the district. We also want to really look at examining how policies and practices impact certain groups of students. And this also means, investing in kind of the historically underserved communities with resources, time, attention, and also direction. And then finally, really looking at the schools that are doing well to really examine their processes and their practices and how such can be transferable to other school communities that we can see from the data have opportunities for growth. And that kind of gives a high level of kind of the choice process from our first round. Certainly, as Chief Hike covered, elaborated, this does not take into consideration just to the timing, the second round process and kind of the data that flows. So certainly as we move forward, we will provide that data to you in a written format.
Mr. Tillman, Brandon, thank you so much. And to Dominic, thank you for your presentation today from your office, and Chief Hike Hubbard. Commissioners, are there any questions for our staff for this presentation?
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. I have one quick question from slide 26. This is a quick question. Is that 26? Oh, the slide that shows the students that's going to the top schools, and it was parochial, and I thought that was 26.
Right, 23.
That was 23. Okay, so right here where you said the 800 private, parochial, and other schools, is that for 2019 to 20, or is that for the fall?
So these are students that applied for the process this year to attend our schools for 2021, because that's kind of how the process works. So this number of students applied this year to attend our schools next year.
Okay, what is the increase? Is that, I think that's the increase this year.
So
what was it last year?
So I can certainly get that data to you. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But
the reason why I'm asking, okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The reason why I'm asking that question is because I mentioned it at another meeting, that there are a number of families who made it because of the virus and things that's going on there, have made a decision to take their kids out of independent schools, parochial schools, private schools, and put them in public schools. And Baltimore County has gotten an increase in students from those schools. And I'm assuming that we will probably as well get an increase in our schools with students coming from those schools. So I was wondering what was it last year and the new number this year. I really would be interested in knowing.
So what we would do in the written update that we provide to the Board of Commissioners, we will include that information. So this just takes into consideration the families that submitted their applications in January through the choice process. But you're absolutely right. We have seen an uptick in interest and inquiries from families that are in private and parochial schools seeking to enter into our district as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, and just in some of the things that they're hearing that we're doing, and some of the great publicity that we received for some of our programs. So we definitely can provide that information in our second update.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Thank you.
Absolutely, Dr. Bondima. Are there any other questions from our commissioners? Thank you to our staff from, I want to get the office name right because it's a fairly new office name.
The Office of Enrollment, Choice, and Transfers. We're under, under the Chief of Communications,
Engagement, and Enrollment.
You got it.
You got it.
Thank you so much for your presentation today, and I look forward to that written update as we go into the second phase of the choice process. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your time.
Before we go into procurement, there was a written update, special education. I'm curious to know if any of our commissioners have any questions that they want to raise now, or will they all just be sent in regards to that update? Commissioner Roberts, I see your face. Do you have any questions about that written or comments about that written update?
I have several questions, but I think for the sake of time to get through procurement and public comment, I'll send them in writing.
I appreciate that.
I will as well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So let's head into procurement.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Joe Vogel, Interim Director of Procurement.
Joe, before you move on, I know that we have one person that has signed up for public comment, and I believe that is Zach Taylor with the BTU. I just want to say to Zach, if he's on, that we may go slightly beyond the time that we were allotted for our meeting. So hopefully you can just hang on for a few moments if we are after 5:30 for your comments. I just want to make sure that I recognize him for that. But go ahead, Joe.
Okay. In an interest of time, would you still like me to go through each one, or do you have specific questions, Commissioner?
I do. I would like for you to go through each one.
Yes, I can do that. Okay, the first one is a contract with the College Board to provide PSAT, SAT, and AP testing for students in grades 9 through 12, and some professional development for our teachers. The estimated total contract amount is $1,759,500. And the contract term is September 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2022. The next item is a contract with the Baltimore School for the Arts Foundation. The estimated total contract amount is $1,121,648, and it's for part-time artists and teachers in high school program, and also arts and teachers who are instructors in BSA's Twigs after school and Saturday program. The contract term was August. Go ahead.
All right,
Joe, just finish up what you were saying really quickly.
I'm sorry.
No worries. The contract term is August 1st of 2020 through July 31st of 2021.
Dr. Bondima?
Real quick, are these numbers that you presented, are they the same numbers that you had before the COVID-19 or when we closed the schools? Those numbers are the same? They didn't change?
Is Dr. Ford on the call?
Yes, I am.
Can you answer that question?
Yes, these are the same numbers that have been in place for a couple of years.
Okay, so because of the virus and all that's going on right now, the numbers and the amount of money remained the same. There was no change. And let me ask the other question while I'm at it, because I know we're in the interest of time. These programs that we run after school and school, I'm very familiar with it. However, we have a lot of applications for people that's outside of Baltimore City. How does that the fee play in with the students who are applying to our program, and how does that affect the money and the contract? And do the students who come in from outside, are they included in this money?
So students that are non-city residents pay a tuition to Baltimore City Public Schools, which goes to the general fund. It does not go to the School for the Arts. We provide the same instruction to both, of course, both city students and non-city students. Okay. And that's a situation on the high school level. On the Twigs level, it is only city residents that participate in that program.
Okay, only.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The reason I'm asking, I want to make it quick, is because of the change in how our programs and how we're teaching and teaching learning and all of that. I was just wondering, the money that was calculated to run our programs in the classroom, I'm just wondering if we're using the same amount of funds to run the program after we go back to the classroom, if we go back. I'm just wondering how that money is distributed, considering what we've been dealing with.
Well, in the case of Baltimore School for the Arts, we're providing the same instruction. For the Twigs program, when we closed, there was 1 week of instruction that remained that did not occur. That was the week prior to the expected spring break. As far as the high school is concerned, we have continued the instruction all along from the arts perspective. And of course, that's about 45% of the instruction that students get at the school.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly, thank you.
Joe and Dr. Ford, thanks for joining us. I've never seen the actual agreement between City School, the school board, and BSA. I would just like to see that, if that could come at some point. I know that there is a specific agreement that is listed actually in the letter, and I think it dates back to 2004, 2005, that school year, for the foundation to engage and directly compensate its part-time faculty of artists. But if there are any agreements, I know that there are special terms for the School for the Arts. I just want to see that.
Joe, is that something you can provide?
Yes, Commissioner. I'll take a look, and I will certainly send that to you through Christian.
I appreciate it. I also want to know, I would like for the board letter to be refined in a way that we can see the amount of money that the foundation is also raising for the school. I would be interested to see that. And then this may not per se, well, and then I want to also know how diverse the actual teaching staff is, particularly for these teaching artists. It would be nice to actually see that also in the board letter as we're supporting the salary for those folks. I just want to make sure that we're being as responsive as possible. And then this question may not necessarily be for Dr. Ford, but in general, I just want to know what our capacity is to support other schools with public-private partnerships, similar to School for the Arts. I know Design School has an interesting model there. Joe, if this question can come, and it may not come from you, it may be from someone else, but I'm just curious to know what is our capacity in supporting other schools with the public-private partnership, especially as we move forward into the 21st century of teaching and learning, and given being in this virtual space, I'd be interested to know that.
Yes, I will get that together. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ford.
Thank you. Have a good meeting.
You too.
Okay. The next is a competitively solicited contracts with 17 vendors to provide occupational therapy services for our students with documented clinical needs for assessments and/or services. The estimated total 5-year contract amount is $2,600,000, and the contract term is July 1 of 2020 through August 1st of 2025.
Joe and Dr. Brooks. Is Dr. Brooks on?
I am. Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Brooks. It's so good to hear your voice, by the way.
Thank you.
I hope that you're doing all right. I'm curious to know if there is a way for us to see, and this might be tough, so you just have to let me know if it's doable or not, but I'm curious to know how much we're actually spending or allotting for related services.
So I actually do have a 3-year trend to be able to say how much is being spent or has been spent over the 3-year trend for this service for occupational therapy, as well as, and want to be very clear that this includes both students with IEPs and students with IFSPs. And so that's our infants and toddlers. So this is for students from birth through 21. And so for our students with IFSPs, that's a year-round service. So it doesn't end once the school year ends. These are services that we have to continue to provide throughout the summer months because it is year-round for our IFSPs. And this is when we usually use our contracted vendors and not our FTEs for the IFSPs. And so I definitely have those trend numbers that I can provide for you. And then these services, usually for our younger, our babies, this is when we have more of the OT and PT services that those students need. And then for our more involved students that have more physical needs at some of our separate public day schools and our citywide programs also need more of those type of occupational and therapy services as well. But I do have that data that we can provide because I did look at the 3-year trends to determine the amount that we would need to request over the 5-year period.
Dr. Brooks, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you, and I think that would be helpful for the board to have, especially commissioners that are not necessarily on this committee, to actually see that information, because I actually had a commissioner in operations to ask some questions about some of these, so it would be helpful actually.
Okay, not a problem.
I appreciate that. And Dr. Brooks, I know we're not there, Joe hasn't introduced it, but would it be similar for the next item with physical therapy services?
Yes, I have it for both.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Commissioner, would you like us to include that in the formal board letter then?
I think it would be helpful. I think it would be helpful to see that.
Yep, yes, okay. We will do that in both the occupational therapy services and the physical therapy services. which the next up is the competitively solicited contracts with, again, 17 vendors to provide physical therapy services for designated city school students with documented clinical needs for assessment and/or services. The estimated 5-year contract total is $1.5 million, and the contract term is July 1 of 2020 through August 1st of 2025. Next item is a contract with the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Employment Development to support the Youth Works Summer Works Program. Youth Works program will provide hiring of 60 youth at the district office. The total contract amount is $101,999, and the term is July 1 of 2020 through August 7th of 2020. And of course, the activities will only be executed, if we get back into the building.
So, Joe, with this, I'm also curious though, if there will not be any work or opportunities for students to do virtually. If this letter is only in regards to being physically present.
May I jump in to provide a little bit more context? This is Rachel Pfeiffer.
Please, Rachel.
Hi there. This contract is actually in the process of being slightly amended, and we will get a copy out to you as soon as we can. We had a request, given the circumstances, as you might imagine, many things are changing rather quickly. And after the submission of this particular request, we had a request from the Mayor's Office of Employment Development to amend this contract to allow us to spend the same amount of money, but instead put $25,000 toward a contract that would allow us to pay for curriculum for students to use. Because YouthWorks will be virtual this year, we would serve slightly fewer students, but we would help the Mayor's Office of Employment Development purchase a contract that would allow students to have online curriculum for this virtual time.
Thank you.
So Rachel, can I work with you then to change this wording for the formal board then?
Yes, absolutely. I think the team has it in progress.
Well, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is a contract with Crisis Prevention Institute to provide your trauma-sensitive, person-centered, nonviolent crisis intervention training focused on prevention and de-escalation techniques and other alternatives to the use of restraint. It also includes the safer, less restrictive physical interventions to be used only as a last resort when a student presents an immediate risk of harm to themselves or others. Total cost of the contract is $50,496. The contract term is July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. Next item is a contract with Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education for a total cost of $165,500 to conduct professional learning, coaching, and consultation in partnership with additional academic offices to address over-identification of students with disabilities. Contract term is June 10th of 2020 to August 31st of 2021. The next item is a contract with Baltimore Curriculum Project to provide climate and culture support services as well as curriculum support to Pimlico Elementary Middle School. And this is for the 2021 school year. The board originally approved the contract on August 27th of 2019, had a contract term of July 1 of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. The board is being requested to approve a one-year contract extension through June 30th of 2021 and increase the contract from $252,962 to $443,482.
Now, Joe, okay, so I see in this letter, it says for a partial in-school hybrid opening, BCP will continue to work or will continue to provide side-by-side in-class coaching and PD, as well as weekly student performance data review. So that just answers the question that I was having in the event that we're not physically back. So this is hybrid. So if we're not physically back, then we just won't spend this money that is being asked for.
Jim, are you there?
Yes.
Jim Brennan?
Yeah, this is Jim Brennan, Executive Assistant to the Chief of Staff. Good afternoon, commissioners and committee members. Laura Doherty of BCP is also with us, and she can answer that question.
Good afternoon. This is Laura Doherty with the Baltimore Curriculum Project. Thank you for inviting us here today and considering this request. We are planning on providing anybody who is in one of our schools and Pimlico with summer training for online instruction in case there is no face-to-face instruction. And we're also working this summer on making sure that we have great tools for our teachers to access for online learning, in particular to our curriculum. And as well, we're also working on lots of training on restorative practice and trauma-informed care for both teachers and students as we if it is completely online, we still have to make space in our days for circles and care. So we're ready for any situation. Well, we're not quite ready. We are planning to be ready for any situation, knowing that any situation could arise. But what we will be doing in our other 5 schools would be mirrored at Pimlico.
I appreciate that. I'm just curious as to whether or not the letter will need to be amended, because I hear what you're saying with online and virtual, but some of the services are they best if they are in person? I'm trying to
well,
get at, if we're in the virtual space,
yeah.
Will this have to be amended in any way, shape, or form due to not being physically present in a school building but going virtual? Will there be a cost comparison? I think that's what I'm asking.
If there's work that we are not able to do, it will not be billed for sure. But the kind of work that we've been doing while we have been completely online involves virtual coaching. So if a teacher is doing an online class, the coaches will attend the class and give the teacher feedback. If a teacher is putting on recorded lessons, coaches view the recorded lessons and give feedback. So there is quite a bit of work that can go on, but if we're in a situation where it doesn't make any sense to do it, the money won't be spent.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that, Laura.
Yes.
Okay. The next item is a contract with the firm Improving Education to provide supports for teachers and leaders in the area of continuous improvement. The total 3-year contract amount is $600,000. Contract term is July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2023. Oh. Okay. Third question. Okay. The next contract is with the Baltimore Urban Debate League to provide professional development and consultant services. The 3-year contract amount is $480,000, and the contract term is July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2023. Next item is a contract with the Institute of Multisensory Education to provide Orton Gillingham training and materials. The total 3-year contract amount is $900,000. Contract term is June 10 of 2020 through June 30th of 2023. Next item is a request to increase an estimated annual amount with Holistic Life Foundation from $645,000 to $995,000. They provide social emotional support services. The board approved the contract originally to HLF on September 26th of 2017 through September 26th of 2020.
Joe, I wasn't on the board in 17, and the funding stream, can you talk about the funding source for this particular letter? It says general or grant funds from various schools or department budgets. Would you just elaborate on that for just a very brief moment if you can?
Typically, on services like this, schools will decide whether or not they want to use a particular firm's services. So when that happens, they choose the funds that they have available to them, whether they have grant funds or whether they decided to use general funds. And at the time of board letters, we don't know which schools are going to use the services or we don't know what fund source they will use at this time.
Sure. Thanks.
You're welcome. Next item is a contract with Voyager Sopers to provide letters professional learning courses. The total 3-year contract amount is $1,950,000, and the contract term is June 10 of 2020 through June 30th of 2023.
I'm curious, will only schools that are receiving, well, Title I and Title II schools, are they the only schools and teachers that will be eligible for this?
Hi, Commissioners. This is Laura Jones, Director of Teaching and Learning Operations. That's an excellent question. So with Title II, it actually doesn't restrict which schools get to participate. So because we're kind of braiding Title I and Title II funds together, it does allow us to serve all schools with the relevant grade band. And then for this support in particular, I believe that's K through 3.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Laura. The next is a contract with BKL and Associates to provide consultative services and technical assistance with regard to providing new principals with onboarding and professional development as well as coaching. The estimated total contract amount is $126,500. Contract term is July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021.
Just moving forward, I would like to, I see in the evidence of effectiveness, our retention for school leaders. I see that there for year 1 and year 2 principals. It would be helpful to also perhaps hear some more feedback from those participants and how, what is it, more qualitative info, more formative info from them. To hear how they have gone through the training, the learning, and how it has benefited them. I think that could be helpful for us to know.
Right. This is Bandima. I have a question as well, very similar to our question you just asked Commissioner McFadden. I would be very curious to know, that when we select the schools or universities, higher level universities, higher education schools, is it because of the program and the program is only offered at that particular school? And do we look at other schools to make those selections? Do we look at Morgan State University? Do we look at Hopkins, UMBC? And I, again, what Commissioner McFadden said, I really would be interested in hearing from the principals who completed the program and get an in-depth survey or response as how they felt the program went and their experience in the program. I would be very interested in that. And I'd like to have it as soon as we can, before the summer is over. That would be great.
Is Roxanne, Ashley, are you on the line here?
I am. This is Roxanne. Good evening, Commissioners. The BKL, just for some clarification, I can definitely get the qualitative responses to you. Could I ask for some clarification around the request with the partnership with the university there with the BKL and the onboarding and the coaching? It does not involve.
Roxanne, I think Dr. Bandima was more so referring to that final letter with Towson University, 16.02. Dr.
Yes.
Bandima, am I correct?
Yes.
So her question was not in regards to BKL. It was in response to Towson with item 16.02.
Exactly. Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome. And I know that this has come up also. I've seen this also before the board, this partnership with Towson, and I know that it was explained then, but it would be nice to have that explained for Dr. Bandima and for Commissioner Roberts, who wasn't on the board last year. I didn't think that the contract that we looked at last year was one that we extended for 4 years. This one is one, well, that was offered for 4 years. This one is now a 4-year contract that we're looking at. So it would be helpful to hear similar to what Dr. Bondima was saying, I know that this is a special partnership that we've created with Towson University, but are there opportunities and ways to extend similar partnerships at a Morgan, a Coppin, a UMBC, or Hopkins, as she said?
Absolutely. There certainly are opportunities to do that. Our goal is to continue to partner with all of our surrounding universities in order to maximize our offerings so that we are not duplicating the offerings necessarily, but offering a variety of programs and certification types that our teachers need in order to continue their learning and their growing and their leadership development. Yes, we had started some of those conversations and had hoped to be further along. And then this spring we did had to put some of those on hold again. But we have full intentions of circling back so that we do have more of a menu of options that are inclusive of more universities.
And real quick, because I know we're out of time. When you present these proposals or these documents, do you submit it in such a way that you can give different schools or all the schools an opportunity to present what they can offer and then make a decision if this is what you're looking for? Or do you just select the school, and how do you go about doing that?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. This was actually started just through reaching out, talking to several of the different universities, and how can we partner to really make the offerings specific to Baltimore City and the needs of our children. So that's how we started, but we can certainly do some sort of match similar to what you suggested. I think that's a wonderful idea as we move forward in really trying to partner strategically.
Thank you.
And Joe, I think it would also be helpful with a letter like this one from Towson, one that we have done similarly before, one that the board has approved similarly before. It could be cool. This is an idea to do a comparison from the previous letter that we saw to the new letter that we see, so that we can just compare what we did in the past to what we're being asked to do now, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'll see if I can work with what Roxanne and maybe put something together for you that way then, yes.
And letters, and just letters also in the future, like if there's something that we've approved previously, if there is a way, it's just a thought that I'm having, if there is a way for us to do that comparison from what we approved prior to what we're being asked to do now.
Okay, yes. So that's it.
That is. Thank you, Joe. Are there any other questions from any of the board commissioners?
No, thank you very much.
I know that Commissioner Roberts did ask a question about procurement during the recovery. Commissioner Roberts, did you still want to chime in now, or do you want to, while we have Joe, or do you want to do that at a different time?
I can send a follow-up. I can send a follow-up question, just for the sake of time.
Okay.
Could you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, you're welcome. Be safe.
Is Zach Taylor, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you, Zach, and we had a lot on our agenda today, so please forgive the overtime, but we're all over today, so thanks for bearing with us. I'm here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. It took a second to get off mute, and now a fire truck's going by my house, but okay. So I'll just start. Thank you. We know this is very short, and just want to say that in light of everything that's going on, we just want to start by first recognizing the youth of Baltimore City. Many in BTU leadership and many teachers and PSRPs took part in Monday's very peaceful, highly organized march that was led by Baltimore City students. And we couldn't be more proud of them in this incredibly difficult moment. And we look forward to their continued leadership on this and other ways that educators in Baltimore City can fight for racial justice in Baltimore and really throughout the country. And so regarding some of the topics tonight's meeting, first we just want to say it's disappointing to hear the high school choice process be reviewed, but not have the issue of ESOL students highlighted or have a slide about it. We've been working on this issue for many years. There have been a lot of the activists, parents, other teachers, students, really heavily students, the SOMOS student group. We want to follow up on this and hear what happened with ESOL students for this year's high school choice process, and how does that intersect with the issues of equity and our equity policy. And with our remaining time, the BTU wants to emphasize that with the great uncertainty that surrounds the next school year and the immense amount of planning and ongoing work that's necessary, we just want to formally request in this venue, and we'll be sending a letter tomorrow, that we actually just delay the implementation of the Instructional Framework 3.0 and the policy for unannounced formal observations. We think this is just kind of common sense given where we're at, and it takes way more than 3 minutes to go through all the different details. And so we hope this is the beginning of a conversation. I know we're over time, but I really invite and welcome your questions. And we'll just say in our remaining time, these are not simple tools or policies. They weren't designed to take into account social distancing in our schools and all of these changes that we're currently experiencing. We don't know what next school year is going to look like. We don't know if we're going to be able to hand students materials. We don't know if there's going to be group work in any of the normal ways in which there's group work. It's not clear if teachers are going to be able to look over the shoulders of students and give direct feedback in that moment for what's happening on their desk and with their work. And that's, lots of questions around phase 2, phase 3. And the instructional framework, unannounced formals, they were designed before this, and really these are works in progress, as you've sort of heard today. We've asked for guidance documents, training sessions, resources. A lot of this is still in development. We could go into those details. We've requested a number of things that have not yet been delivered. And we have a lot of serious concerns about the recertification process for qualified observers. Both are we holding them to high expectations, and just questions around bias and prejudice that happen in any evaluation system. We know there's lots of studies that show that the person being observed, students in the classroom, their gender, their race, their class, all play a role in outcomes. We've seen this again and again, and we haven't seen the training put in to help adequately address this issue at the qualified observer level. But really, it comes down to, we don't want to be distracted for next year. There's so many things to focus on. There's a lot of really good work that's been started. We don't want administrators to be sidelined and developing and testing and designing new policies to implement things that they've never implemented before, when we know their attention is going to be on the health and safety of students, the health and safety of staff, and how to maximize the learning conditions for this new environment. And so, again, I know I'm over time. We really would like to have this be the start of a conversation about why this makes sense and just where we can focus our energies as we go forward. So I'll take questions now, but I do recognize that we're well after 5:30.
Zach, I appreciate your comments today and your feedback. And to me, yes, it actually does. Like, we're in a new space. It makes a lot of sense as far as the policy that you referenced and the instructional framework. I would also be curious to know how we are being responsive to the current time and moving forward in that work. So I agree with you. And I think that we all welcome that ongoing dialogue and discussion as we're in this recovery phase. And also, to your point, I agree with you in regards to the ESOL students and that particular group that has come before us before to talk and to provide their comments and their feedback and their advocacy. They were missing in the choice presentation. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to pick that up in that second round. But we hear you, and I just want to thank you for your comments today.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, and certainly we just want to recognize and honor our students who did lead some protests and some advocacy in the city in a peaceful way. we definitely want to recognize and celebrate those. Is there anything else for from our commissioners?
Yeah, sorry. Was trying to get my phone off of mute. Linda Chinya, I just want to be certain that as the Teaching and Learning Committee, before we leave, that we are just reminding folks that our virtual graduation ceremonies will begin next week, and we want to congratulate all of our students who will be finishing and beginning their next phase in life. So just want to make sure we do that because that does start next week.
Great, Madam Chair. That is wonderful. And it is celebration time. Although we're in a crisis and multiple crises, we do have a lot of young people to celebrate because they have persevered through challenging times. I say that the class of 2020 is one of the most legendary classes ever because they're experiencing challenges like I don't think any of us have had to experience in a 12th grade year. So that's right, graduation start next week, and we are so proud of our city school graduates. Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Any other comments from our commissioners before we adjourn? Or
No,
from our board executive?
Thank you. Yeah.
Christian, is there anything else before we adjourn?
No, nothing else. Thank you.
All right, our next meeting is scheduled for July 7th, 2020. And there'll be a few things on that meeting's agenda, including some more information about our English learners and our ESOL students that will be on that July Teaching and Learning Committee meeting. So thank all of the staff that's been here with us. Thank all of the commissioners we've gone over today. Have a wonderful evening. I'm not going to prolong this anymore. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see everyone next week at our board meeting on Tuesday. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. You did an excellent meeting today. Thank you.